Get ready for a deep dive into the greatest labyrinth of information, revisionist history, covering the hidden legacy of an empire lost to history, the Great Tartaria. For the next 2 hours, your host Victor B will be clearing out the mud beneath your feet to give a clearer view of ancient and modern history. And there's no turning back once you open that door. With Great Tartary, many mysteries vanish, while other mysteries unknown surface. Technasma, catastrophism, pseudo-timelines, recent civilization resets, Phoenicia and the Moorish legacy in America, all will be explained. Every Saturday from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern Time, you can expect to listen to this unfolding narrative which seeks to explain the origin of ancient and modern civilization, and how it was hijacked, and how we can retrieve the lost information of our advanced Tartar ancestors. With your host, Victor Boog, on Radio Tartary in Studio B.
Oh, hey, what does he know? And apparently he didn't know very much, and he admitted this. He said, okay, well, this is new to me, and I haven't heard that much about it. But the whole thing sounds kind of, like they're missing something, or I don't get what's going on. And so all of a sudden, everyone was getting kind of heated and excited about it, and they all jumped into his chat. So he would have had maybe 100 viewers, 200 viewers, all of a sudden just pouring in from Tartarian backgrounds. Everyone's saying, what about this? What about that? And, the mods trying like hell to keep it controlled. They're like, oh, we got to shut it down. The Tartary people are here. They're trying to delete comments and things like that. Not because anyone said anything bad, but it's just, in general, that's what happens now. So if someone says a URL link, then YouTube will remove that link. So if you're linking to a data source about a book about Tartary, well, you can't post that. And so it made it a little bit harder to share. And so he kept saying, well, post links. And we're like, well, you literally cannot. You literally disabled that. But beyond that, there are these stories. The reason I brought this up, I guess, from the get-go was because Walter Bosley was not convinced that Bastille forts were star forts, and that's okay. For someone who hasn't done any research yet into the thing, you should not necessarily be convinced right away. But what is the reason for our looking into this? Well, every single Bastille fort that we've found that's a century or millennia older than the Bastille forts supposedly are supposed to be.
Can you say that real slowly?
So a Bastille fort is supposed to be.
Yeah, can you say that word? Are you saying Bastille fort?
Bastille.
Bastille fort. Oh, sorry. Okay, it's because I hear it as Bastille fort when you say it, and you're referring to the
Bastille.
bastion.
Bastilles are the sort of Moorish castle-like quality that's associated with the bastion forts, right? So there's
It's good to be on the same page with you, because sometimes I'll just assume that you mean something else. So
okay,
I just thought that.
Bastion fort is what's referred to as the star on Wikipedia, and then Bastille forts are referred to as these castles, which are the walls of the giant Moorish stone.
Right.
And so often when you look at a mural, or we've done a few root words together, we've looked at mural in different Moorish etymologies for even the idea of walls. But there's another one, which is Bast. The Bast, I'm not sure if it's Vast or BVD or Teak, because some of these old roots, but there is a reason why it's the Bastion fort. It's not because of Sebastian, although I think Sebastian also has some of this root. But Bast.
Well, yeah. Let's talk about your trip to Spain then, and what may come out of it still, because I haven't seen too much of your, all your data, all your video you've captured there. You've released bits and pieces of it, and most of it for, entertainment, but also research, of course. So I'm wondering, right. Andreas, you have a documentary cooking, don't you?
Yeah, that's the situation. There's a cooking documentary, and part of what I wanted to allude to was when we look at this stuff and we have these excuses for it, they don't fit inside the narrative. So Spain's very much like that. You go and you find these air raid shelters from the 1800s for bombs, and they happen to be 1,000 years older than that, and they're made out of bricks or these same sort of Bastille-style stone structures. Where are these Celtiberians getting these giant stones that are 1,000 miles from the coast, some of these places in the Aragon Kingdom? So most of the information that we found shows that there was another culture there in Spain that was, A, there was a culture that was wiped out, and B, there's been a culture since then that was wiped out again, and it was probably less evolved than the first one. But you can see where there were ring-like Atlantis cities in parts of southwest Spain, Portugal, and even Africa, and you can see where they were connected at one point. Also interesting is that we found Tartessus was the name of that region in
Finding a
Gibraltar.
lot of star forts in Spain. Oh, you just cut out for me for a bit. Do you have a bad connection right now, Andreas, or is it me?
Can you hear me? Is it working?
Yeah, I'm hearing you.
So yeah, I was just saying Gibraltar. We had found kind of an interesting thing, which was that Tartessus was the name of Gibraltar at one point, and that they called the Tar nation of that area Tartessus before eventually calling the Hades of the land of the dead in Latin Tartessus.
Yeah.
So
well, I found in my research, Andreas, sorry to cut you off a bit, but Tartessus was, the Greek word from also Tartarus was, a Spanish version from the Greek, and they called it Tartessus, and it ended up in the southern tip of Spain. You've been there, I know. So what I found is that one of the sons of Japhet, or actually one of the grandsons of Japhet, is called Tarshish. And Tarshish is placed on the biblical map in ancient times in Spain. So that all fits together. So Tarshish actually is a biblical Tartarian tribe of Japhet, and it ended up in Spain. And it's very interesting whether that tribe was Moorish or whether it was Aryan or a mix, because I think that the Moors we actually have in Spain may not be the Berbers of Africa only. I think we may actually have a case of the Turkish Moors that arrived from Asia.
There's a number of weird links to this. One of the things is the Tarsus and the Tarshish and Tarsus. If you look at the Bur Dan River, also known as the Tarsus River, and the Tarsus waterfall, you start seeing that there were a number of Turkish peoples that associated with the term tar. The other thing that was connecting this I thought was very interesting was Detroit. So yesterday, a guy came into my office and just started yelling, "Oh my gosh, I love to drop Tartarian knowledge bombs," because he had never heard of Tartaria about a week ago, and now he's like completely enamored by it. He's like, "I was watching a video on the internet of a band I like from the 60s, and it said, oh, they're playing in Tartar Field." I was like, Tartar Field?
Tartar Field, what does that mean?
Well, apparently Tartar Field was a very important place for bands in Detroit in the 60s, and a lot of really cool bands played there. And
Detroit, you say?
Detroit.
That's interesting.
Detroit actually, it turns out that Detroit was the Detroit Tartars were the name of the team of the Wayne State Warriors up until 1999. Wow. And I'm finding all this stuff about the Wayne State Warriors in Tartar Field, all the bands that played in Tartar Field. There are songs about playing in Tartar, and then eventually they removed the name because they said not enough people knew what the Tartars were. It says literally, quote, "Due to a feeling that the Tartar name was dated and that not many people knew what a Tartar was," quote unquote, in 1999. But at the same time, if you look back, why did they choose the Tartars to be their name? Well, apparently it was a student poll that selected the Tartars. So
somebody knew about it then.
Yeah. So,
interesting. Very interesting narrative there.
When you look up the Wayne State Warriors and the Tartars, what you'll find is, and I'll send you a link for a picture, the new logo for them is a emerald green colored Knights Templar with a sword swinging. And so what I presuppose is that they're also saying something with that, because
Mm.
the green emerald is associated with vanadium being the 23rd element, right? Is that correct? Let me just double check that before I get, yeah, 23rd element. And so
Wow.
vanadium is used often with electromagnetic frequency shielding and with energy storage. There's been some pretty fascinating work looking into EMF. And some people have thought Crusader armor, at least it can be used for EMF shielding. So it makes some sense that it was at some point, which is far out, but there's actually plenty of evidence according to the Antiquitech that, you know, you've seen.
Right. Sorry, I got a bit distracted because Bridget just told me that Nathan his car broke down. So Nathan was
Oh,
supposed to
yeah.
be coming here for the second hour. So Andreas, I'm also letting you know then that you are more than welcome to stay 2 hours because it doesn't look like Nathan is going to be showing up, unfortunately.
Oh, dear. Well, Nathan will probably have had some information to say about these things. That's actually the thing, is a lot of this is hinging on, you know, when we talked to Walter Bosley and Nathan was there, it was really fascinating because it was a culmination of a year's worth of research at least, where we all were very comfortable saying, no, Tartary does exist. That's not the question. The question is, what was it really like and what is left of it? And I think that was it was a groundbreaking moment because we didn't let the argument slip to there, you know, could be not a Tartary. No, there was clearly evidence of maps and everything else. We're moving past that. But what is the truth beyond that? And one of the craziest things is when you start saying, hey, look, it actually exists in the Western Hemisphere. Because, you know, some people will put out pictures of the 19th century photos and say, okay, this is clearly a photo from, you know, the Crusader period. It was 11th century photo. And it's really hard to argue with someone or prove something like that. But if you can look at some of this information and see that there actually were settlements, that we do have examples in Illinois of there being mesa pyramids, and that we're just told that the civilization had slash and burn agriculture all the time, which is the explanation for why there's not very many remnants, even though we're then finding like Mexico has more bastion-style star forts and, you know, more
You
bastions.
remember that the picture where it shows that Tenochtitlan, the
Right.
ancient Mexico or ancient city beneath Mexico City today, it had at least eight star forts on its city walls, 4-pointers. So those star forts will have to be Aztec or Tartarian in origin and not colonial. And that blows the whole narrative up because they need to have a narrative where they say that the original people or the native inhabitants all over the world were not advanced enough to be able to build such things. So they have to take credit for it. So it's like people are sometimes feeling like, oh, they are smug idiots, so to speak, because they want all the praise for all the buildings. And I'm like, no. It's something that they have to. It's something that they need to do because otherwise their narrative would not work. So there's an element of no choice in some of these things. And you get the feeling for also why some of the stories are so ridiculous because when you really just have to make up something and you have to make up something for 100,000 buildings all over the world, it's gonna be, you know, it's not gonna be quality, it's gonna be quantity over quality, if you know what I'm saying. And I think that is the case. That is what's happening, and that's why the archives, I've been scanning them for so long. That's why I see the same patterns and the same narrative, the same, you know, weak narrative, and I scour for contradictions. And you mentioned the mound builders of Illinois, and I have so many contradictions about these people. And what I normally say is that whenever they say that a people's origin is unknown or obscure to them and they don't have any good theories, and good examples of that is the Scythians, the Mongols, the Huns, and the Native Americans and the Tatars. All these people, they're like a big question mark when it comes to these people. And this is because they don't want you to have any good ideas about it. And if you look old articles up at the, let's say, Library of Congress, I've had a lot of luck in there, you will find that the narrative has changed a lot. That ethnology in the 19th century was going on and on about all sorts of different theories as to these people's origins. And now today, they say they don't have too many clues about it. And I don't know if it's because they're more modest or it's because they want to hide something. I would say that there are forces in academia that seeks to hide Tartaria. And we have evidence of this. We have this CIA document that clearly states that, and I quote, "The history of Tartaria was to be fabricated," end quote. That is CIA saying that. And the reason for that, well, the stated reason is to forever hide the nation's past of Muslims. So to deny knowledge of their nation's past. That is what it states, and that's very interesting. It comes in the wake of the Second World War and the communists' takeover of Russia, and how it, pretty much was a cancer in all of Europe, and it changed a lot of the history. And all Muslim countries that was annexed in there, they were under orders to falsify anything they had about Tartaria. That is what the CIA document states, and that was declassified in the 90s. So we haven't been able to that data hasn't been available for so long. And now we're only finding out about Tartaria, and we're behind, I feel, because things are also moving quickly with this. And Putin was just caught in saying in public that the Tatars are likened to, well, what was it? Did you catch that, Andreas? Putin said something about the Crim Tatars.
Right, so that was another interesting thing. The Crimean Tartars, the Tatars, are likened to the Cossacks. Is that right? Was that the one?
No, he said something about them being, and I want to be correct on this, so I don't want to put out rumors, but I clearly remember it was something very bad, something he likened them to, perhaps terrorists or like Hamas or something like that. It was bad.
So there is a modern group of Tatars, which we should not confuse the history of the Tartarians completely with the current state of the Tatars.
Right.
In the same way that China has really augmented itself, in 100 years you wouldn't be able to recognize what China was like 100 years ago. I mean, Manchuria was in charge, a completely different ethnicity ran China, and there was, and they're basically completely extinct now. They've been completely genocided and wiped out. Plus, any of the 52 other ethnic minorities in the last 100 years have been sort of replaced by, bedding. So in the same way, you look across Kazakhstan and parts of the Soviet areas, wherever there were for the last 200 years, wife raid kidnapping traditions, for instance, where in order to marry your wife, you kidnap her and then hold her against her will from her family and pressure her, saying that they won't accept her back. These are the kinds of places that these places have become, and so there's a lot to say about what happened to Tartaria in the pogrom era, when there were wife kidnapping, and when the foundlings were taken, when the women and children were taken, because the men were.
Have you ever seen the real data of the foundlings and how the articles say that there were hundreds of thousands of children with no parents just showing up in all of these foundling homes in Italy? I remember reading one of the articles, and it just seems so crazy to just envision like 50,000 kids in the manner of like months.
At a time.
With no parents, and no one knows who their parents were.
Clearly over the years, there were millions of kids that were brought from one country to another and vice versa. They would bring them back and forth, and the kids would show up without the ability to speak the new language, and it would be a great way to begin the traumatic mind control process of building new personalities, where they're all molded based on some sort of a mind, like a peer pressure inside of this foundling school, the foundries. and forced to work, and they'd work in these machines, which they were the right size to run. Another interesting thing, these giant machines that were designed for small people to run. But in general, like all of these foundlings, if you start looking into them, a lot of them end up very important. It makes you wonder what was going on, that so many foundlings became the chief of police of Belgium or the prime minister of this and that. So,
Yeah, I think it correlates with the Jesuitical mind of get them young, right? Get them
and
before they're 7.
that's the real bottom question, and it seems like that's the weird one you have to get into, is what do we say about the Jesuits? Because and obviously groups change over time, and we can talk about what happened in the past without saying everyone's doing exactly the same thing. Although it's important to know that at one point the Jesuits were excommunicated from the world, from the Catholic Church. They were said they were not allowed to be anywhere, essentially. And Catherine the Great had protected them for about 50 years, it seems. But when the Jesuits had the energy to kill the new pope, dig up the old pope's body, excommunicate his soul from heaven, and then erase history, that's all taken as kind of as historical record at this point. So the question then is laid down: what is the true date? And we've got all of these issues around dates, particularly in 1790. I think George Washington celebrated his birthday privately on a different day, pretty much than everyone else, because the Gregorian and the Julian calendar at 11 days difference in alignment, and that's not even counting the differences in years. So there's so many of these secret calendars that people started using around that point. And then you have the Baha'i calendar. The Baha'i calendar should not be underestimated either, because it connects back with the 5,000-year cycle to this lost history. And William Randolph Hearst's mother, Phoebe Hearst, was very into Baha'i. So I think the Baha'i actually might have some of the secrets of the New World's organization from the Lucis Trust on. And it also might reveal a lot about what the world was like before, when it was Tartarian.
Yeah, that's interesting. Well, I also wanted to ask about Spain some more. So you said that you were making a documentary. How are you envisioning, like, what is the object of search in your documentary, and what do you hope to conclude and document? Were those hard questions, Andreas?
Sorry,
Or-
can you repeat? I didn't hear you.
Oh, okay. Were I muted or something, or is it
Repeat.
Okay, sorry. So yeah, I asked you, what is the object of search in your documentary, and what do you hope to conclude and document to people?
Oh, yeah. So in general, what we're trying to find is like the actual middle truth between the stories, because when I first went out there, I was expecting to find that, to be honest, less was true than I thought and it turned out more was true. I was thinking we'd find, okay, obviously there's going to be this big reveal where we see that there really was a history before Spain. And then that all I knew before I got out there, because all these European countries are very recently named. So that wasn't hard to know. You could find out that there were the Cordoba Caliphate was not called Spain, easy. But when you start looking a little deeper than that, and for instance, when I went to Cordoba, I saw like these crazy Arabic water wheels, and you're like, wait a second, these are Celtiberian water wheels, and then you find out Lorca was originally named the Sun City, Helios Orchestral, like the city and its run, the organization run by the sun. And they had all sorts of water wheels that spun alternating current for lights in like the 11th century, they admit. So I get the feeling that what really was originally going to be a documentary on how, we just don't understand how simple things were originally, turned into, no, actually, seriously, they had electricity. And it's kind of a funny thing. But it's also, that's one of the reasons why I've been taking my time with it, because I want to make sure I'm proving things and not just showing But when you get to the cities and you see the water cities connected to the fully operational electric systems from the 1700s supposedly, but they really are. If you've been around and you've seen how old the stones are and how giant the stones are, you can tell that everything else in that period is made of tiny bricks. So that's not made of that. That's made of something different. That's made of stuff that the older buildings are made of.
Hmm.
It makes it a little easier
What do
to
you
tell it's older.
feel? What do you feel the history of the Basque is?
Well, the Basques are pretty interesting. You can't say for sure what's going on with anybody, but what the Basques have going on that's pretty you could point out is that, for instance, their grammar is the same as Japanese, and there is no other language like that. It's pretty strange.
Well,
The
actually,
vocabulary is not the same. The vocabulary is very
the in
much augmented from like more of a
well, you're
Tamil.
right on, Andreas. You're right on, Andreas, but there's something more to the story, and I think this will add a huge puzzle piece for you. I recently found an article that goes into the ethnology of Central Asia by a Mr. W.J. Davis, Doctor of Philosophy. Would you like me to read just a part of that?
Yes, please.
Okay, so the ethnology of Central Asia with W.J. Davis, Doctor of Philosophy and ex-professor of the University of St. Petersburg, was introduced to lecture on ethnology in Central Asia, where he had traveled extensively. He stated that the object of his travels was to study the unity of the human race and the origin of man. He went from St. Petersburg down the Caspian Sea and thence in a Russian war steamer to near Tehran, the capital of Persia. There he met a number of dervishes or pilgrims who were returning from a visit to the tomb of Mahomet at Mecca and were on their way to Bukhara and Chinese Tartary. He accompanied them, and on arriving at Kashgar, the capital of Chinese Tartary, he began to study the Turanian family of languages. This linguistic family embraced all the Tatar dialects, from Chinese Tartary to the Altai Mountains, and all over Siberia. To this family also belongs the Basque language, spoken on the Pyrenees between France and Spain, the Hungarian language, and the language spoken in Finland. So,
That's
Tura-
exactly corroborating what it looks like from my research, because the Basque language, it has the very Finnish roots that are similar to Tamil, which is not the Sanskrit based language. And in fact, it
exactly.
seems like there are two separate cultures, Tartarian and Scythian.
Well, if you let me read on, there's a comment to that from the author here. He says, this same Turanian family this article is a bad photo of an article, so it's hard to read. This same Turanian family had its origin in the Altai Mountains, and its civilized existence went as far back as 8,000 years. This is a Turanian family. These are the Tartars. They're saying that their civilized existence goes back 8,000 years. The language of the Turanians was different from the Sanskrit, so that's what you just said, and Aryan languages. The cause of this difference was, and I feel this is not right, he says, the cause of this difference was the separation of the Turanian family from the Aryan by thousands of years, and the position of the Altai Mountains, on account of which communication between Turanian and Aryan races was impossible in olden times, which I just don't. I feel this is a very weird explanation. It's from incredulity. It's all supposedly right. So, but they're saying that they weren't able to communicate because of a mountain range, and that's right after that he says that one of these linguistic families had a civilized existence going back 8,000 years. They were very civilized, but they couldn't cross a mountain range. Now, how does that? It doesn't ring true when all the uncivilized Tatars or Huns, decades after this, supposedly were able to cross any mountains with their huge armies and lay whole Europe to waste. That it just
unless
it's a
it's a
huge
specific
contradiction.
unless it's a specific mountain range that was uncrossable because of a disaster like a volcano or some sort of an industrial disaster, which is something that we've also been looking into, is places that are no-fly zones for a century at a time. I mean, look right now in the Soviet Union, there are places that were forbid for people to visit. Are today, even now, as the Russian state or as other states, you cannot go into them because of the radiation, even if the
Well, I
radiation
have one
atlas passes.
theory, Andreas. One crackpot theory about this I have is that there is an invasive race among these two, the Turanians or the Aryans. I think one of them does not originate here, so to speak. They may not both originate, but it feels like that one was definitely before the other, and that could perhaps explain the, you know, fundamental difference in the language, that the language families that also came after them, and also why they didn't mix too much in the first from the get-go or the onset. So I
Well,
don't
there are
really
some interesting
feel like.
things.
Oh,
There are
sorry.
some
You can go
interest.
on.
There are some interesting qualities to the Basques. For instance, I mean, they are often tall and redheaded. That's a trait. And there's
Hmm.
also the black-haired Basques, which then is probably because of their interaction with the Moors or the Arabs that were trading at that time. But it seems like in general, all of these people were on boats at one point, and there did have some interaction between them. So that does explain why their language has changed so much, and it also explains Japan, because it means maybe Japan is the extreme example of militarized conquest and a people being replaced with another people. That's what's going on right now today in China, but it looks like, and that's what they're trying to do to Taiwan. And Taiwan, is a great example of there being indigenous people that have very close relations to the Basque, to the Finnish, to the Tamil Indians, and also to the American Indians with the Lakota and Cherokee. Similar cultures, totem poles, feathers in their hair, all of
Hmm.
it. And so, but you're seeing how it's being augmented so quickly, because all it takes is a few generations of taking away the parents, especially, and having a soldier be the father. Several generations later, the culture will look more like the one that conquered it. And that seems to be what happened in Spain. That's a big part of what my documentary kind of looks at, is how Spain was augmented in order to homogenize it. And it's still one of the least homogenized places. It's ironic how much they don't want to speak. I mean, everyone thinks they have to learn. Think about 1 billion people speak Spanish around the world because Spain made them learn it. But in Spain, most people don't speak Spanish, right? Like, most people
Hmm.
spend their day speaking Basque or Galician or Catalan. There's only so many Spaniards in Spain. That
Right.
is interesting.
Yeah, it's just that the Spaniards are taking the whole stage, and the others are not. They are happy to not be talked about or noticed, and that works well for the Spaniards and the modern people there. And no offense to anyone, of course, but we're just trying to view this in a historical context.
Yeah, I mean, just
And
objectively,
yeah.
the Tartessian language, has been wiped out of the Iberian Peninsula by the Spanish state. But the Spanish
Mhm.
state didn't exist. So realistically, it's not like we're saying the Spanish state. We're really saying like the Cordoba Caliphate, or the Condesas, or even the Kingdom of Aragon. Aragon. Like,
Couldn't it
there are a
also have
number of
been
people.
the Sephardic Jews in Spain? They had a stronghold there, and they were casas.
Yeah,
And
there are.
one of them was Loyola. He was in Los Alumbrados, the proto form of the Salamancan legal school, the legal school of Salamanca, where international law was fought up by one of their scholars. I can't remember which one. It's crazy they don't teach you that in the history of philosophy when you talk about economics. But at last.
Well,
um,
the removal of the Sephards from Cordoba,
Yeah, the
and
Sephards.
it's a pretty interesting moment in
They
Spanish history, because so many people that were educated, that were involved with the state, that were international trading partners for other nations in India and Africa. And yes, there were even human trafficking systems going on. There was like human slave trade was large with
Yeah,
Sephards as well.
you
There was a lot.
remember that amazing painting we saw when we went to Dania with Mike Stellium. Be sure to check that out on YouTube. Stellium7 on YouTube. Go subscribe. Yeah, do you remember that painting we saw when we went into the gates of Castle Dania? That amazing painting of where giant Moorish people are being, yeah, what can we
Oh,
say,
right,
deported. And you
right.
see these giant Aryans inside the walls, and you have tiny little humans also walking, yeah, among them. It's just crazy that they have that in the entrance gate, and they don't have anything to, like, no questions about it. They let like thousands of people watch that every year, and I wonder how many people actually like spot the obvious and ask the
Well,
question.
it's pretty clear that Spain is filled with tiny people. I mean, there are giant people, but there are a lot of really small people in Spain, like
Yeah, that
Danny DeVito height, and it makes you wonder what happened, how did they inherit this place built for giants? Because Spain's built for 30-foot tall people. All the doors are 100 feet tall and things. It's crazy.
well,
I mean,
you've
they're
seen Juggernaut in the Marvel universe, right?
recall which one?
Oh, oh, okay. I thought you just I reckoned you knew all those characters, Andreas.
I
Juggernaut
missed. Oh,
from the Marvel.
Juggernaut. Yeah,
Yeah,
Juggernaut. Right. Yeah.
yeah, they were like larger than he would be. These people
That's
on this
that.
painting.
That's the thing. These giants that are 120 feet or 20 feet, they're very different. So it seems like what they're talking about is a group of simultaneous hominids that existed and that were descendant of some of the smaller ones. Also, it seems that we have a lot less physical strength, so that's another interesting thing compared to other primates that can lift like 80 times what we can lift. It seems like there's something that happened at some point, and it's a pretty obvious jump from giant buildings like Baalbek, giant stones bigger than the pyramid stones, to tiny little bricks, and door handles that are 2 feet up off the ground on a 100-foot door that they then cut a door into the door because it's too crazy.
Yeah, it's really crazy. And do you remember when we went into the museum adjacent to that painting, and we tried to take there were other paintings of giants, and I tried to take photos of it, but then a guy stormed in because he realized what we were doing, and he was like, "No se admite fotografía." And it was it was funny because I think that some of these people know that, like, there were like giant pots in by the entrance as well, just stacked by each other.
Yeah,
Like,
I got in trouble once for taking a picture in a chapel room in one of the cathedrals in Leon that it was not supposed to walk into, and it just had downwards pointed pentagrams and goat heads. And I was like, oh, really? Oh,
yeah,
interesting. Oh,
very
don't,
interesting. But
don't take a photo. I already posted it online, bro. You don't
tell
even
the
understand.
audience what you did when you visited what's he called, Franco's Crave, what you did there.
Oh, didn't I do? I had the soup and then fish. It was great. No, I mean I went to. Okay. Well, let's see. The thing about Franco's grave is that they're going to pull it apart soon. That's what all of these people are working towards. So I knew it was not going to be there forever, probably. And frankly, by the way, like even if you think someone's like a massive loser or like murderer, moving bodies is just you should be. I'm a little superstitious on the poltergeist side of things. I wouldn't think it's great to move his body for a lot of reasons, one of them being just the high amount of artwork and the ambiance around this place is so occult and creepy that it just seems like you shouldn't mess with things like blood and death and whatever. But
Yeah, those
in the
fallen
valley,
angel statues, man.
well, before you get to the fallen angel statues, you have to go by the abandoned tuberculosis haunted hospital in the woods, and then you got to go through the Valley of the Fallen. It's literally called, which
Yeah.
is just, like, if you've read Revelation, it's that they're that bit where they're like, everyone will be up to their knees in blood. It's like, okay, so apparently that's what literally happened there for like 1,000 years. The soil's really good because they just killed people. It was like everybody ever was like, this is a great place to have a battle. So you'd have the Iberians, the Moors, the Basques, the Romans, take your pick. Anybody
It's like Valhalla on Earth.
Yeah, it was Game of Thrones. It was whatever show you want to watch. It was really bloody, and then eventually the other weird thing is, like, so I'm sleeping in my car at one point, or a rental, so I'm on my way to this crazy place in the middle of Madrid in a caravan, and my window's a little rolled down, and I totally get this like ghosty vibe, like some lady's at my window, and I look and I freak out because like she's not there, and like it's just like find out the next day that there's a story that like some Moorish princess was married by some Visigoth kid, and they went and left her in a cave. Now she wanders around looking for like lonely dudes. I'm like, oh whoa, ghost stories, huh? In Spain? They're like, oh yeah, we got tons. And another
Oh
one
my
is
God.
another one is that NASA, like when they did their moon landing thing, supposedly went through Australia to Spain. They had to bounce it around their signal is the story. And so there's a bunch of Spaniards who believe that NASA and the government of the United States hunts down and has been hunting down anybody who heard the original recording, because the original NASA relay through Spain had more data, more information. They saw more, whatever it was, whether it was that it was fake or that there was aliens, I'm not sure, but they all have different thoughts of that. But so you've got all these superstitious people and all these crazy stories, and you got all these Slavs living there, which is the other weird thing about this whole thing, is everywhere you go you find people with names like Bogdani, in there, Bogdavich or Bogdanos. I mean, like you get to a point where you're like, okay, I get it. You're Hungarian, or whatever you want to call yourself. You're Tartarian. But then you get to this giant cave, that's been blown out of a mountain, and on top of the mountain's 100 and some odd meter tall cross being held up by all of these very fascistic looking humanist statues. A very strong woman, strong man. And then you go inside of the cave, and there are these like Empire Star Wars kind of looking statues with hoods and cloaks. They're holding their swords up, and they're all these dark figures like you're under the Emperor Palpatine. And I saw all these other kids that were like 25 to 30 looking altar boy becoming priests. And I went to Sunday school and catechism, so I went through the motions. I put my left hand in and right and out again and up and down and did the cross. I followed them through, and I ended up sitting with them. And they're like, "Oh, you're sitting down?" I mean, like, we didn't speak because it was in a church, so they couldn't tell. I guess I looked Spanish enough. I looked like Madridian enough. I ended up doing the Eucharist on my knees.
But what about Andreas, when you trespassed property on Franco's grave?
Oh, I wouldn't say that it was trespassing. I mean, the priest liked me. You know what I mean?
No, but yeah, okay, I can describe it for you. You're obviously having a bit of trouble with it. So, on top of Franco's grave, there is like an obelisk or a cross. What is it, Andreas?
It's a cross. I think it's a cross. Yeah.
So it's like the grave itself, where he's buried, is inside a mountain, and on top of that mountain, on the outside, which is fenced off and governed, right? There is an obelisk, yeah, as you said.
Yeah.
And Andreas wanted to get a closer view, so Andreas ignored.
Oh, okay.
Well, no. What you said to me when you did it was like, oh, so they just made the path a bit harder. It was like, a challenge path.
Yeah, that was. I probably will get in trouble at some point by the Spanish government for that story. But yes, I accidentally crossed a path that was onto the side of the mountain, and it was like I went to a part of the hill that clearly not a lot of people have gone in decades. Like I saw old remnants of soda cans from like the 50s with the tap lids and things like that. So kind of interesting. The area there was like probably not meant to be seen by many people. But I mean, I try to be respectful of graves. Like I didn't step on his grave. Like I went around the grave. The graves were in the center in the building, and they turn off the lights and put out the candles when they turn the bread into the body and the wine into the blood for their Eucharist ritual. They turn off the lights and it goes pitch black. So you're in a pitch black cave. And yeah, I mean, there's a very serious kind of tonality to the place. There's not people taking photos. No one's filming. It's very private. You're not supposed to do anything that would be disrespectful. The thing is, they're at this weird crossing point now where people are going to start fighting them on having it, because their thought is that this guy was from the wrong side of history, because he's called a phalangist, which is considered a sort of fascism. The problem is, it was a war. He murdered a lot of people, but so did both sides. And most of the stories I've heard about Spain come from the anarchists. Not that I haven't heard other sides of it, but most of what I aligned myself with George Orwell, and Letters from Granada. And what it looks like to me is that the communists murdered as many anarchists as possible, whereas some of the anarchists were, part of the phalangists for a while, because the phalangists at least allowed for a nationalist state. So there's no side of this which is really innocent, and I don't think it's fair to call the other side good, And that's what's scary about trying to get rid of this historical record about what happened in the 20th century, is that, it's not that he's a perfect person. He's obviously made lots of horrible decisions, and that way we're able to account for ourselves by watching that historical narrative. If we take that away from ourselves, history repeats itself. I'm not the first to say that, because history tends to repeat itself. Right. People forget it.
Yeah, that's right. Well, we have approximately 4 minutes before our supposed promos. They didn't go on last time, so I will listen for them this time to see if they go on. So yeah, just a little heads up.
I will say this for anybody who wants to see some of that Franco footage, you can see it on the YouTube channel, because we did premiere it live.
Right. I remember watching it. Yeah, so if you go into Xirtus YouTube channel, Xirtus, and yeah, there's only one guy called that on the internet as far as I'm concerned. So it's unmistakable and very easy to find Andreas's channel. He has about 10,000 subscribers. I'm very suspicious how you have stayed exactly on 10K for like 3 months, like neither dropping one or gaining one.
Well, according to my my side of things, it looks like I've got about 1080. I think I've got like 80 more in the last 3 months, or 85, 90, I guess. It's the thing that's funny is I get comments pretty much every day from somebody, and it'll be somebody new who's like, dang, here's a verbatim one right now. Dang, how come I've never noticed your channel until now? I'm barely realizing how far ahead your research is. Your videos are like 10 months ahead of everyone else's. Wow. Your videos are gold, bro. I didn't know you were a fellow native from SC. I mean, like, this is how, and I just have to respond to them every day, be like, yeah, I'm just lucky you found me ever, because I'm probably the most shameless example of shadow banning that most people have ever seen. But hey, at least you're finding me now. So.
Well, yeah, you're right. So remember to go in and subscribe to Andreas, and be sure to check out his videos, because they are very educational and blowing people's minds. And I know this I'm a witness to this daily. And we have about a minute, so I just wanted to remind the audience that you are listening to Revolution Radio, and we are listener supported. So be sure to go in at freedomslips.com and find a way to contribute, because without you, the listener, this couldn't happen, and we need your support. So Radio Tartary is our new project, and we're very happy to be doing this and having this slot on Studio B. And and Andreas will hopefully be one of my regular guests. Normally we also have Mike 13th Mungie and Nathan Armorow, which is also part of Andreas's community. And if you go into tartarynova.com, there is an invite for the Discord, the Xirtus Tartary Discord. And therein you can join our Discord and you can come and chat with us and join this research community if you so please. You can also just, be a little a fly on the wall, so to speak, and just follow what we talk about. I know a lot of people also like to do that, so no pressure. We just like to be engaging and meet people.
And Tartary Dude T-shirts. We just got a new line of Tartary Dude vaporwave looking T-shirts because of Walter Bosley. So do check those out because they are on sale, and you could dress like a Tartary dude.
Yeah. Well, I haven't heard the promos go on yet or the music go on yet, so it may be that we have the same case as last week, where we have no promos and we're just
we have to make
on
our own
for
promos.
2 hours.
Today's show is brought to you by the historical significance of mud. Have you heard of mud? Mud everywhere.
Well, no, tell me about it, please.
Mud's sticky.
Tell me about mud.
Well, we can talk about liquefaction, actually. Do you want to bring up some of the reasons why mud flood's part of this? Like, what's up with liquefaction, and why are we injecting salt water into the Earth's tummy?
Well, okay, I as I tried last time, I want to start at the beginning when we talk about mud floods, because I feel like a lot of people who are not into this, they really need to go and watch some of Philip Drushinen's videos first and then come listen to us, because it's very hard to convey what this is. You have to have those eyes looking at the evidence, so to speak. Then it all makes sense. But I guess it's easy enough to explain conceptually, but it's such a weird topic. As Andreas brought up, liquefaction may be a thing in here, but the guy who coined the term called it flood, mud flood, which implies a flow of mud. And yeah, that is perhaps wrong. Perhaps it was just to be called a mud event or a mud accumulation, to be completely modest, but it was coined mud flood. And I can say from looking at the evidence, it does definitely look like a lot of the mud that we see in the cities did flow. And so I think there is hope for the term. It can survive, but right now we're looking for the cause. And what is very much mind-blowing about this topic is that every major city in the world, like with an old cathedral, older than, let's say, 1810, if you have a city like that, you're bound to find old houses there, old structures that are sunken apparently into the ground. You have windows that are built below the street level of today. Sometimes you even have doors below the street level, and this becomes visible when they do a reconstruction or a dig to install piping or whatever. Then some of these things show, and you can see that there is old masonry, old windows in the ground, literally 10, 20 feet below where you're standing. And the only explanation is that something covered that building, because no one would ever build doors or windows in the ground. Because for what purpose would you do so? There are no purposes. And we have had architects looking at this topic, and they agree. They have to. What else are they supposed to? Because there are no ways to explain it. The basement thing is somewhat a safe for some of the examples of buildings that appear to be mud flooded. But when you really get a building that has doors and windows below street level, there's no debate about that. It's even a common known thing that Rome was inundated in mud, and that a lot of buildings had to be dug out. And those were habitable buildings, and they were habitable after that, after they renovated all the buildings. And basically this mud flow and the same effects you have in Rome you also have in what we think of as very modern cities, such as like London, Paris, Copenhagen, Cairo, Detroit, any of the big cities in the US. Take a pick. We're looking for cities where we don't have this evidence, where there is, a lack of this evidence. And so far, we haven't quite found any good places. Where I live in Denmark, where it's extremely flat and the topography is not that big of a deal. We don't have mountains or anything else. We still find this weird thing. So without hills or anything to flow on, we still have mud flood evidence all over Denmark. And it makes, yeah, it makes my mind go nuts because I'm looking for the cause of this. Did it come from the ground? Did it come from above?
Probably
Was it mud
both. That's
flow?
the thing.
Yeah,
If you have
everything is
volcanoes
open
that
to me.
launch, if you have volcanoes that launch mud, which is we've seen mud volcanoes in Iran, in all over the world. If you just look up mud volcano, what was the one that we saw recently? That was I remember Brittany was going off about one in South America, I think, or Europe.
Yeah, mud volcanoes. And do you remember that book I found where it talks about Russia and in the 1800s, and they recorded a mud volcano that changed the whole Crimean Peninsula. Before the
Absolutely.
Crimea today, there were islands out there in the Crimean Peninsula that were much larger. And when this mud volcanic event happened, they formed an entire Crimea and destroyed the islands. And they explain how fast it went and what it changed, and they show you maps over time how the Crimea changed because of mud. So it is really a hot topic. I feel like mud volcanoes are a very promising route to take for the cause of all of this. But I did also find one very interesting thing that goes along with the mud volcanic eruptions. And I found it was actually a stamp that was posted in the Mudflood and Hidden History Researchers group on Facebook. And I can't remember the guy's name. We have so many people that come in there and they have like one piece of evidence that blows everybody's minds, and then they post that and then they leave again. It's quite weird. But this guy, he came in and rocked my world with a a stamp from an old book that he had a photograph of. So he obviously had hands-on material with it. And this stamp showed a mud volcanic eruption in Tartary, and it was in February 1792, and it shows and it talks about on the stamp a fire from the sky accompanied with a giant mud volcanic eruption. That is, I'm paraphrasing here, but I remember the key words that it said, and I was like, whoa, this is around the mud flood time, 1812, around Napoleon's comet, around the year without summer. It's just before that. Everything in the whole world is going haywire at that point. Comets everywhere, revolutions, uprisings, take a pick. There's so many things going on, devastation, and the largest earthquakes in modern history were recorded there. The New Madrid earthquake event, which is, well, not really that well documented, kind of like the Tunguska event. Really weird. And also a lot of other events that took place in that time or during that time. And I find it astonishing that we weren't taught to focus on this area or this,
We're
this
we're
time
kind
in
of
history.
like we're kind of taught triggers to hide it from ourselves. For instance, like when I first heard of tarnation, or when you hear tartar sauce, like you obviously get those words, and even Chartessus, the idea originally for the Spanish that this great city that went through a crisis or a collapse is now a dead city. So it's a dead city, it's a tar-covered city, a mud-covered city. But at one point, those were all terms of like technological endearment. Clearly, like even Tehran, you can see how tar is so deep of an original thought. I think
Hmm.
it's also funny when you look at the flamenco thing, how history, chronology, the new chronology has shifted things, because we don't know exactly what things were like in places like Iran during the Akkad Empire anymore. But we do know Akkad and Akkadian and Cajun are all related words, and
Hmm.
that the Ferengi and the Franks were the original inhabitants of the zones of what are now considered to be Chartesia or Chartessus or Tartar. So
Well, you
more
have the
and more,
Gauls, right? You have the Gaelic people, the Gauls,
but
and it's
they're
funny how
nomads. The Gaelic
well,
people are nomads because they lived also in the north.
yeah, yeah, I know, but as Josephus says, after Tartary, after the catastrophe in ancient times, what would be the biblical flood, there were a lot of Tatars who came to Europe, and some of them were the sons of Gomer. And Josephus says in the War of the Jews that the Gomerites inhabited Wales and Spain and France, and that they were also called Gauls. So that would be the reason for France's old name, Gallia, and the reason why the archive is called Gallica. And you also have Galicia in Spain, right? It's the same thing. It's from Gomer, and Gomer were one of Japhet's 7 sons, and he were one of the 7 sons that were, very like Gog and Magog, on good terms with Gog and Magog. So he was part of the Europe Tartary um, line, and he inherited Spain, and he's also the seat of the Basque people. So that's
That's
why
a
you
good
have the Basque Tartarian language there.
that's a good linking actually when you look at the Gaul to the different Gaelic cultures, because when we're starting to look into the Gaelic connection to Welsh and the Welsh language in Brazil, where we found some records, there was a lost library museum a couple years ago. It was burned down in Brazil, and it lost most of the records that we had on connecting these indigenous tribes to the Welsh language. So all of a sudden, everyone's been trying to find anything they can to re-corroborate this because it was fantastic information. But we found a few books. There's a kid who had a collection of them, and he's like 25 or something, living in São Paulo. São Paulo is a city in Brazil that's got kind of isolated, but it is a very civilized place with lots of
Cool.
technology.
So
And
Brazil triggers my memory. Have you watched yet my video on my YouTube channel of the Star Fort in Paraguay? Mike and I we found one night.
which one? Where was that one at again? In a
It's
sense,
on yeah. Go
yeah, yeah,
subscribe
yeah.
to my YouTube channel.
Yeah, I saw it.
The
It's great.
the
The
boogie
Boogman.
the boogeyman. Yeah, I'll post that
Boogeyman.
in the chat.
That's what it is. The Boogeyman.
Yeah, the boogeyman, which is Buggeman, boogeyman, and the before that is with a large T. So the boogeyman. And you'll find a video called "You Thought the Star Fort Search Was Over? Exceptional Star Fort in Paraguay." And that in there we show a huge star city in the middle of the jungle in Paraguay, and it's just amazing how the old walls of the Star Fort is still visible, and that the Wikipedia page of this fort is not showing that it is a Star Fort. Mike and I, we found an old map and confirmed it on Google Earth, and it's contradicting the narrative a bit, and it's very interesting just for the location of the Star Fort and the size of it, and also their narrative of how in the 1800s people were still supposedly building star forts in the middle of the jungle to defend from people like I don't even know who they were defending from because they were yeah. It's just the weirdest thing. The Paraguayan Wars, Andreas. Can you please cover that topic for humanity, please? Can you
I know,
unpack
right?
that?
I'm so
It just seems like the craziest war, like even more crazy than the Civil War of the United States. So I think there's so much juice in there, Andreas. Please cover that for us.
I mean, obviously, I'm so hesitant to talk about like 1,000 different parts of that because let's start with the most important thing. Like the Triple Alliance War wiped out 99% of all people living in Paraguay. Okay, I think that's
Hmm.
the most important statement that needs to be made. Like according to records, and everyone now in Paraguay, which is not that many people, moved in afterwards supposedly. And the funny thing about that is you start looking at the names of the places in Paraguay. For instance, Formosa. There's a place called Formosa, which is just next to Asuncion to the west, next to a river that's called the Taurus River. And little things like that start to stick out. When you get a little deeper into the history of Paraguay, what you see is that it was the Jesuit superstate. It was the first planned superstate. The Jesuits created a place where everyone was forced by law to intermarry. You could not marry, for instance, another European if you were European. You'd have to marry an indigenous person in order to homogenize everyone under a new Paraguayan nation.
What could we call this? It's like forced ethnocide by consent.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if consent's even really the word, because it wasn't really consent. It was like the dictator.
They could have left the area, couldn't they?
Sure, but it's like, this is a place that's about the size of Germany, or 6 times the size of Germany or something. It's pretty big.
Yeah, okay.
It's the heart of South America. In a lot of ways, Paraguay is like the heart of South America. It's like Tibet. It doesn't change very much. Even today, you go there, and there's Indians on motorcycles like they used to be on horses, but that's about as much as things have changed. There's still lots, but the worst part is you go deep enough, you start seeing, gridded squares that are hundreds of square miles of farms that have just had everything removed from them. So Paraguay is being stripped. George Bush's daughter, under his own initiative, owns tons of land now where, wouldn't you know it, after they purchased it, they found out it had natural gas reserves underneath it. So now they're controlling that, and then Nestle is taking the water. So currently things are already pretty bad in Paraguay. But going back to this point, in the 1700s, there was a war in Paraguay, and it's called the Triple Alliance War. And what that means is that there was an alliance between 3 states against Paraguay: the Brazilians, the Argentinians, and the Bolivians on all sides attacked Paraguay. And that's how they wiped out 99% of the population. This also synchronizes with the Jesuits being excommunicated. So that's another interesting thing. This also synchronizes with a third to half of Japan being wiped out right before and during the beginning of the Edo period, when the Japanese government, if you read the book Silence by Endo, or you can see the movie with Adam Driver, Silence, Scorsese made, you'll see the story of how at least half of Japan was Catholic at one point. And they were wiped out.
It's interesting because in that area, I don't know if this is Catholics trying to alter history or a perception of antique people, but the Nestorians in Tartary, in the Far East, in Kitai, and in Japan, they were white Aryan Catholics. They were like the first Catholics to stray from Europe, and they supposedly founded the wealthiest city in Tartaria, which would be that of Cambalu, which was I'm still researching this. It would appear that there's evidence for Cambalu was perhaps Tenochtitlan in Mexico City, because on old maps the Mexican Gulf is actually called the Catayan Gulf, which would be the Tartarian Gulf, which blew my mind when I first saw that. So yeah, it's still, the research is ongoing there. But so yeah, the Mexicans, they are definitely to be taken into account. The Aztec and the Toltecs, and also the Olmecs.
In the name,
Yeah, we at this point I see them just as another term for the same thing, the thing that we're researching, and have given the name of the Tartarian Empire. There was a guy who asked me on Facebook about the Khmer Empire in Angkor Wat Empire in Indonesia. And what is striking about that, if you want to relate that to Tartary, it's pretty easy, I'd say. You look at Angkor Wat from above, and then you go to Google and type in the Tartarian city, and that should yield a picture of the Forbidden City in China. And that is also called the Tartarian city. And you'll see that the dimensions of the Tartarian city, the Forbidden City in China, and Angkor Wat correspond completely. Perfect match. And also on Angkor Thom's walls, you have these large faces, which are very much alike to the large faces we find built by the Olmecs. So it's not hard to draw comparisons between these communities at all. And it seems like modern history has had a very fun time of chopping up everything in different pieces and also giving arbitrary names and installing new fake native peoples in areas and teaching them a false history. And I think it takes a lot of time, a lot of planning to do so, but it's definitely possible. And I think it may have happened to some of the tribes of the Native American Indians, where simply the first of their chiefs after the mud flood would have perhaps been an imposter. That is just something to think about, because if that could happen,
Well,
then
one
you
of the
could have a
interesting
fake ancestor. You could have a people that thinks they know who they are, but are actually something else because their ancestors were raped and used to stage history like 2 decades ago. That is entirely possible. And if you think about the orphan trains and the violence of the Phoenicians would definitely be able to have that such a plan, I would think. But of course, this is just a crackpot thing to think about because I don't want to assert that the Native Americans don't know their ancestry because I know a lot of them do actually do that, and oral tradition has survived. But I just feel like some of the tribes, maybe some of the more popular tribes that also got mostly westernized, some of them maybe, yeah, either one of them sold out at some point or there was a fake imposter installed to
One of
alter
the
history.
earliest tribes that was removed is the Tupinamba. And the Tupinamba, that's where the Tupi languages came from. Guarani is the only language spoken as an indigenous language that's still spoken as a first language in any state as far as the Western Hemisphere. India, there are exceptions in India, but not in the Western Hemisphere. Like Canada even has pretty much lost all of its first natives using in their first language, but Guarani is used in Paraguay even in business meetings on television. It's completely common, and it's not that it ever died. So that's kind of another interesting thing. What's strange though is that it is based on older languages. Guarani is based on Tupi, which is based on Tupinamba. And it is interesting the two, like the T, that if it's connected to tar. But the
Hmm.
Tupinamba people they were referred to as educated, colorful, quite Tartaric looking. You can see pictures of invading. Here, let me show you this picture of invading the Tupinamba, Brazil, and you'll see it's hard to believe that this picture is supposed to be life in Brazil in 1550. I
Yeah,
mean, look at Brazil in 1550. You see what it is. It's a bunch of cities that look very modern, but there's very very old stonework. Like that stone bridge looks like it's very very old, and there are
right.
dwarf small people, the works. And this is all the stuff we're talking about. Is in the Tupinamba genocide. And you look at the pictures that they
Is
have.
that a Wikipedia picture?
Yeah, it's a Wikipedia picture.
Interesting.
Here's
Sometimes
some
you
of the
find very good stuff
conspiracies.
there.
They believed, yeah, they believed that the Tupinamba were cannibals because they ate monkeys. Is the official story that they weren't cannibals, but that they ate monkeys, and that the story got confused. But look at some of the pictures of the Tupinamba, and you'll be impressed. They look very much like the like Pocahontas colored, but the statuesque German Roman sort of statues.
Yeah,
They look more European. They look, and it's kind of interesting that the Tupinamba became the Tupi and the Ngatu, the Ngatu, I think. Let me send you a link to that too. The Ngatu were the last of them in Brazil, but the Tupi were along the line of Brazil to Paraguay, and then the Tupi became the Guarani. And the Guarani, they're so much more closely related to their original language than anyone else in South America. So it is a good jumping off point, but the problem is it's very simplified. They've lost everything other than maybe like 600 words, you know? And that's all they needed, probably, and they built new words. But so much of it was broken in 1500, which is, you know, like before they were supposed to have been ethnicided. That's the other thing, is this idea that everyone was killed off just because of these, you know, a flute that had syphilis or something. I forget if it was supposed to be syphilis or the polio, but the flute didn't give all of South America. I mean, that's just a great metaphor and some sort of an archetypical story, a legend, of the flute representing the destruction of the language and of the people through their own communication, through worship, probably.
Right. Yeah, I get that. It's very interesting. It kind of, to me, looked like on the pictures that not only you have the Aryan traits, the facial traits, but also remember that not the Hamites or the Negroes of Africa, they have, you know, not the same facial traits as we have, but there are other dark-skinned people that have the exact same traces. And if you look into the Moors of ancient Europe, you'll find Aryan-looking people by facial features, but they are actually dark and have afro hair. And sometimes it just feels like if you only need 2 generations to whitewash the color in the gene pool, then how many white people actually had dark ancestors? Because what I found out recently is that I have an ancestry going back to the 1300s. My family is part of the ancient aristocracy in Denmark, one of the oldest noble families. And my founder, the family founder, Niels Bugge, he had a wife. First he had a wife, and then he got separated from her, and he got another wife. And one of these wives had a crest with a Moorish man on it, which just struck me as odd, because if you were Aryan or white in your family, so to speak, would you have a Moorish man on your personal crest? I think not. And
Yeah,
so,
I mean, the thing
yeah,
is, though, that at one point everyone became Caucasoid through a mixing process where 1 to 5% is Caucasian. So, in other words, everyone has dark-skinned ancestors. But there's also, you know, interesting things about the melanin promoter sequence. I mean, Neanderthals and mammoths both share it. So mammoths had red hair often and were blonde, which is kind of interesting. But also the Neanderthals, they gave us, you know, gave Caucasians that trait, and that, you know, is actually mixed with a number of other sequences. Sometimes it's, you know, there's phytomelanin, which is another one, which is the Capensis has, and that causes freckles and red hair and red skin. So, I mean, all of them have their place in nature, is the thing. And it can turn on and off generationally. If you're protecting your kids from the sun for a generation, the next generation, you know, you might find it interesting that 2 recessives become 1 dominant trait. You know, maybe both of the parents have grandparents with blue eyes. But even they're brown hair and they've got brown eyes, and then their kid comes up blonde, blue-eyed, and they're very shocked. But in South America, I noticed it happening quite often. You know, in Chile, you'd have 2 dark-haired parents, and then the kid would have blonde hair because it's just a recessive trait. It happens. So yeah,
the recessive genes can actually be. I don't think they actually know how many generations that they can skip, because when it actually skips, I don't think they can empirically, you know, isolate when it happened from, how far back it went from, unless you have all the data of the ancestors' gene pools and DNA. So I think sometimes when they say, oh, this recessive gene sprang perhaps like 2 or 3 generations, I think they're just guessing, because I don't think they would like to admit that the recessive genes can actually go further back than they admit. And if they could, sometimes you would see the weirdest thing, as you just mentioned. You have these weird anomalies where both parents seemingly have brown eyes, and and brown hair and looking all brown, and and then they suddenly have a kid with a yellow hair and blue eyes. It's just like, what?
There's some pretty decent math tables you can do in junior high biology to show you like how likely two recessive traits will repeat. But the funny thing is, does not account for consciousness, and evolution actually has a certain amount of choice in its mutation. I mean, it's proved by that your mate and you are meeting each other, and it's even more mutations of evolution are more rapidic and consistent in these generations recently, where people are choosing their mates based on alcoholism and partying, and like there's actually been a more quick evolution, even though the population is considerably dropped, like because of this.
When you say evolution, what do you mean?
I just mean like minor evolutionary mutations in DNA sequences, because what every generation, a parent and another parent hybridize to create the next generation. So I'm looking at it kind of like plants, and humans are like plants in a sense with cell walls, but in general, what we're looking at is a change of these people.
Yeah. Okay. Right. Change. So right. So what do you think? Like when they use math to deduce recessive genes, don't you feel that is a bit disingenuous when they go afterwards and call it, science?
It's just missing part of the equation. Like the idea rings true that likely everyone with blue eyes comes from one person 13,000 years ago. That might it might rhyme with the truth. There might not be exactly that's exactly the way it went down, but in a sense, it might be. There might be.
Don't you feel it would be better, Andreas, to just not say anything at all if they're not, certain of it?
Right, but I don't know if they're not certain of it. I kind of think that they're maybe like disclosing a certain amount of information when they say that, which is that there are a number of hominids that were, allowed to interact with each other. This is what they believe. This is the Blavatsky Darwin theory, really, that there were multiple simultaneous hominids that make up a interacting humanoid race, which is really a culture of 5 or 6 or so different races that are interacting together. And it seems more and more finding that in DNA. Like, what is the Floriensis? Why are there dwarves and why are there Neanderthal?
Well, but don't you also feel like by how little DNA is understood or known about, that we should also be hitting the brakes there to assert anything about or comparing DNA phenotypes with other DNA phenotypes?
Well, I mean,
because
DNA,
it's like kind
DNA
of from
is
incredulity, isn't it? Because
DNA is something we know more about than most things. That's the nice thing about DNA. Is it proves God exists in some ways to people, because it shows that it correct its own errors, and a lot of people didn't have any sort of faith in anything fundamental before DNA. And then when DNA happened, like the way it was first really like researched was you were taking photos of mutating telomeres, and so you get like a Mr. Coffee and you heat up DNA, and then it creates a polymer extending chain that then repeats, and you take photographs of that and you get kind of an idea of what all the pages together the DNA would look like sorted out. It's sort of like if you got like 7 different books, and of 2 of them there was actually one whole book together, and they were all shredded up and composted for 7 months, and you take whatever data you can, you put it together and get something out of that. But with computers, you can stitch together, little photos of things, and you can actually get a pretty solid look at the DNA. And you can check it for errors and find out that it's true. And they've sequenced hundreds of people, thousands of people, gosh, millions of people's DNA now, probably, with all of these different companies. So and then they've also looked at what's the difference between Neanderthals and Floriensis.
But there is a problem, Andreas. These people who also brought you the news of DNA also very early on decided that there was something called junk DNA. And largely, well, everybody bought it. and I don't
Well, okay,
understand.
that's a fair thing, and I have to admit, I'm removed from reality so hard on this one because I'm from Santa Cruz. I'm just from where those kids found out they could use the school College 9. It's called College 9. They were up there, and they're like, let's just use a Mac. We'll set several
Because
of
I
these.
feel,
They used a video
well, I
editing
get your
station.
bias. I
They
I
used a
get your
video
bias and
here's
fascination with it.
here's how it went down. They said DNA was going to take 10 years to understand because there's too much information, maybe 20. And then that week,
Mhm.
some kids said, I bet you we could use a video editing render farm to process all that data. And they wrote a Python
That's
program,
interesting. But
and so
but
after that,
I get
all
your
these
fascination and
all
bias
these
then.
all these kids are involved with DNA. There's actual students that are looking into this stuff who have
But
biases,
yeah,
and I
it's
don't even
fine if
agree with
they're
their
like
biases.
it.
I don't believe in like 90% of what most of these scientists kids believe in, but I do believe that it's worth doing these metrics. And so by measuring, like for instance, my friend's dog was the first dog to have their DNA sequence, and it's interesting to know things about chromosome counts. It's like, for instance, the Reef muntjac. You know that there are like 128 different kinds of muntjac deer, each one of them with a different chromosome count. One of them is the same as humans, 23 pairs. Another one has the least amount of chromosomes of any of them is 7. And another one has up to 128. Like there is a lot of weird stuff going on in DNA. And if we
That is
don't look
right.
into it, and then the other thing is we have software. So if you want, just download BioTwist. You know, it's free. Like Genome Compiler was picked up by this company called BioTwist, and BioTwist is doing incredible stuff. Some of it is scary, of course. You know, like you're gonna see the Jeff Goldblum fly probably because of DNA information that's happening. But other stuff's pretty much like looking up what sequences are causing mental health or stress. Some stress sequences make you live longer. You know, like we're gonna learn about all sorts of preventative medicine because of DNA. So I think it's worth doing the research yourself. You know, I mean that's the other thing. Eventually,
Yeah.
vaccines are going to make sense, right? Because like if you're able to actually mutate your own DNA, then it makes sense to write your own vaccine. Like that's the craziest thing. You might have people say, "Oh, I'm totally against vaccines," but then you're like, "Well, what if I could tell you you could take your DNA from when you were young, you freeze it, and then you inject it into your DNA so that you patch yourself with your own DNA." And that's gonna, that's gonna make a whole new ethical conundrum for people that say, well, what about using someone else's DNA? So you have, sequence from somebody, and eventually you'll be buying sequences, some people. And so the transhumanist side of this is really scary, and it's really important that people look into it and they start to think about it, because you can't just be like, oh, well, I'm skeptical. Sometimes, because that's just hiding what is actually being worked on from yourself. And you
Yeah.
need to see it because it's happening. People are already injecting and changing their DNA right now. There's already been
Yeah,
people.
but my problem, Andreas, is from the onset that how are we supposed to really view their credibility at large when you have all these experts believing in something as inane as junk DNA for so long just because someone popularized it, and then when they retract junk DNA, they do it in this whimsical fashion where we're like, okay, so we were wrong about this huge thing, but we'll like don't really talk too much about it. And please also don't remind anyone that we made this mistake and believed in it because we don't want to look stupid. And I just like own up to it, man, because they don't
Junk
like to
DNA was
be able
always
to
a lie.
say they
Everybody
don't.
knew. Everybody knew junk DNA was a lie. Nobody really. I mean, like it was from the very beginning. It was pretty clear that DNA was holding all of the data, and so
Well,
that
then they were
junk
just
is kind of
cowards.
DNA is digital Noah's archive. It's bigger than that, is what we're finding out. I mean, it's true that we're wrong about
I
DNA because
think
there
you're
is
right,
there.
Andreas. I hope you're right that they knew it all along, but that makes another problem. It makes them, disingenuous liars also,
Yeah,
and
a lot
cowards.
of the time, I think people were saying, "Don't look at this part of DNA," and it could. There's some pretty evil reasons, but some of the least evil of them are just that copying the exome is easier than copying the whole genome. So if you're scanning just the part of you which is different from other humans, presuming that all humans are the same, right?
Hmm.
Then it's just junk DNA. But then when you go in and you start scanning all of the genome, that's like 8 to 10 or 12 times as much data. You know, it's only like 2 to 20% of I think it's 2% of your data is your exome. 98% is genome. So it's a lot more information to scan. And when you look through it, wouldn't you know it? It's not all the same. That's what I think is the point of this junk DNA thing being kind of questionable, is it can't be all the same. Everyone's got different origins. And that's a huge, I mean, everyone knew when they started to talk about this, it was going to start cultural wars. There's going to be debates, and there's going to be all sorts of questions that people have when they find out, for instance, you know, that they're not all descendant from the same cavemen. And it's already been addressed in a lot of ways. For instance, in New Zealand and in Indonesia, people have already, you know, come out with information about how the Floriensis mixed with the Denisovan and made populations there. But no one's really come up with a way of dealing with what that really means. What are the implications of this? That we're descended essentially from Bigfoot, you know, or from something else, some of us. That's the thing about junk DNA. Like when we start looking at it,
and also about the recessive genes, if they really can span, like also epigenetics, right? If recessive genes and epigenetics really can have an impact, like 20 generations, like down or something.
Most definitely they can. I mean, all of these things are there. You turn them on, you turn them off. Right. So when we find out that some of us have some things others don't, that's going to be huge. But then also a lot of people have been, you know, homogenized. So a lot of that stuff is in a lot of people. So that is what Madame Blavatsky talked about, was that what's the end goal? Mix everything together, apparently. Whereas others are saying, no, you cannot do that. You have to stick to very specific lines of DNA. But then we're seeing that those cause health issues too. So clearly there has to be generational cycling, and this is how they grow corn. So it seems like that's the thing. Like they've already figured it out. They are farming, monocropping, and figuring out how to make different kinds of humans. But at the same time, if that's the information they're releasing now about DNA, how much of this do you think they didn't, you know, already know in the 70s? Like if it was a kid at UCSC, the laptop basically, in 2012.
But when I went into university, Andreas, into biotech, they told me that junk DNA was real, and it was proven by this guy all along. So definitely, my professors were either liars or morons.
What did they what did they describe the junk as? Because sometimes they refer to
unusable DNA, unusable DNA that we could just as well discard. That was the narrative.
Wow. Okay, yeah, I was never given that narrative. I was given the picture of it being like a junker boat, like the ship that pulls another bigger boat. What do you call that? Like a towboat.
Oh yeah, a towboat. Yeah.
I was given the analogy of it as a towboat, basically. That's the junk.
I think like that was a very, very clever way to start conceding that they were talking out of their asses for over 20 years.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if they. I mean, the thing is, though, we're right at the forefront of things in California. I mean, if everyone's getting their dogs scanned here, it's changing the way people are looking at California's. Changing the way people are looking at what information is about animals, what they are as a taxidermy species, like is not the same as what they are as a living biological system. We look at like pachyderms and we're like, whoa, what is a pachyderm? Well, that's just a thick-skinned animal. That's not a real thing, you know? So all of a sudden, because of all of this DNA sequencing, we actually have to like we have to move the chairs around in all the zoos, and it's changing things.
I'm sitting with a part of the elephant's eyeball here, Andreas. I took from Mongo, from the eyeball.
Yeah. Shout out to Stellium again.
Shout out to Stellium. Yeah, it's still glittering in the lights, and it has that fascia layer, and underneath it is also crystalline. It's crystalline all the way through. It's really amazing. So yeah, if this goes over somebody's heads, it's our friend Mike Wilkerson, or Stellium 7. Which has been doing amazing research, really, on and into the topic of titans. We could call it titanology, but let's not be that bold and coin something like that. But yeah, please go and watch his series Unveiling a Titan, parts 1 through 4. And I understand if someone is really skeptical. I was too, but I gave the man a shot, and he blew my mind more than I think it is the most mind-blowing thing I have ever come across, and that's saying much. So Mike really changed my whole perception of everything, and everybody needs to, I think, at least give him a chance to do that for them as well, because it is astounding research, and there's really nothing that compares to what he has done. If you know Roger Spur, he has done something that may come a bit close to it, but I would say Mike's research far surpasses his in his diligence. He's very meticulous. He has a hang for the scientific method. He doesn't employ it. He thinks he does, or he thought he did, and then I had to talk about scientific terminology, and he understands it now, and he has to make a few changes, but it doesn't really change the outcome of the research. It's just, the terminology used. But to get 100% correctness is also good, and Mike values that. So he is very much something that you need to go and look at. It cannot be stressed enough, and I think that some of the audience may already know him. So maybe I'll be preaching to the choir here, but hopefully there are some new ones who haven't seen anything about Titanology. So please, Stellium7 on YouTube.
That's beautiful. Also, yeah, I like that you went with Boogeyman. The Boogeyman. That's a good. The Boogeyman.
Yeah, it was Mike who gave me the idea. He was like, "Scaligerians beware! The Boogeyman is coming for you." And I was like, I was cringing when I first read it, but then it gave me the idea for my YouTube channel. So yeah, I also feel like this is sometimes scary information for a lot of people, especially someone like Graham Hancock, because he has been banging the drums of ancient Egypt and ancient Peru and stuff like that, and now all this is coming out, and he kind of
it sounds like he's about to have to deal with it. That's kind of that's what I was kind of getting to. I was like kind of getting to the conclusion of like, when you just gonna start
you're gonna be a Tartar, bro? Are you gonna Tartar up?
Tartary, bro? And I think that's what's going on all of a sudden. There's other people, all these like the pieces are coming out of the chessboard for them to address it however they can, because it's so big that they're gonna have to, But I don't think I think we have to be very careful also because of that. Like, there's going to be a lot of information coming out, and that was the coolest thing about that interaction with Walter Bosley was. There was like, yeah, I don't know. I've seen a lot of these Tartary videos, and I thought they were not very. And it's like, okay, well, I like you guys though; those are good. Well, okay, and it was like, changing the narrative by saying we're the authoritative Tartary bros. We may be Tartary bros, but at least we have cited sources. You can actually find our books. You can look them up. There's information we're getting from the 1700s. We're buying books from real live bookstores, not just from the internet. Things are real. That's a bit more than a lot of other researchers can say, and so that it pushes things forward a bit. That our videos are pretty much the most informative and the least amount of disinformation you're going to find on the subject.
Yeah, we do try to keep it as clean as possible. And
anytime that we find out we missed something, we actually would like to go back and be like, we're sorry, we were wrong. For instance, I think I said on the last video that Mila Jovanovic was Croatian. She was actually Ukrainian. See, we're willing to admit mistakes. In general.
Oh, I have some concessions I also have to make from the previous episode. I remember I have them, but now, magically I cannot remember them. How fitting. So I know I have to make some concessions, but maybe it doesn't really matter because I can't remember them right now. So, who cares? If people are not attacking me for a claim, I don't really see the point if I can't remember them. But I do remember that I had some concessions to make, but they were minor ones. Yeah. it's good to be able to be sensitive to the truth and admit when you're wrong. I actually like being corrected, and I try to get any bad feelings that may occur when I get corrected. I need to get those bad feelings away. Really focusing on that, so I try to program my mind to like being corrected. I think I've reached the point where I just like I kind of like it, yeah. And so yeah, when people, please, by all means, correct me, call me an idiot or something. I'll be happy. And also that I think the same goes for you, Andreas, right? You
Absolutely.
also like being
We're
corrected.
willing to be corrected. We stand to be corrected. And it happens sometimes
Yeah.
because we make a lot of videos and we talk a lot about a lot of different things, that there will be a part where we say the wrong thing and we need to make sure that it's corrected. But that means, we're making sure it's correct. So I hope that also helps you, feel like you can follow along and find out what's truth.
Yeah, but yeah, okay, let's run the show off by talking about Mike's Stafford map. We have the largest collection in the world. We started the show talking a bit about this, but I really want to remind people we're releasing this to the public. And right now there's a gentleman called Autodidactic on YouTube. He has been given the file because he loves Starforge just as much as we do and really wants to help out. And you can follow him on YouTube, Autodidactic, as the word goes, with his big A. And he shows our map in action right now with his recent videos. And so yeah, that's what we're hoping for, that people will take the map and use it on the videos. And if they credit us, then we're happy. If they don't, we're equally happy. It's not like we don't like the credit, of course, but what we set out to was really to get this topic out there and have that map that you can really like send to people and go straight like boom, headshot, Starforge everywhere you didn't know about. And that initial mind blow has been working very well for a lot of let's say newcomers or people who are slowly waking up, because it is really something that is so weird that we never learned about. Wouldn't you agree, Andreas?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny that we've been told all of our lives, especially the people closest to them, that they were just, just to kind of ignore them. The bastion forts are everywhere in Holland. I can't believe it was, like a year ago or 2 years that Mike noticed that he lived basically on one all of his life,
Yep.
That's the craziest thing about some of this stuff, is it's just stuff that's right next to you. It's not even that you have to go to the other side of the world to find it.
Yeah, and it's because a lot of the Starforts are actually, earthworks, or they have become earthworks, so to speak, after the mud flood. So it will be a line in the landscape, and you won't think about it. But if you take a drone, go up, or if you look at Google Earth, there the architecture or the geometry appears again. And I think Google Earth, when it was released, was really like, this was like, yeah, now the point of no return for them is, because now people are definitely going to notice these star-shaped fortresses all over the world. And boom, then it happened in 2000 and what was it, 18? People really started to learn that these star forts were here. And it wasn't I don't think it was 2017, it was 18. So it's very recently that we have started to look at this or scrutinize this topic. One of the first one in, let's say, the English-speaking community was a guy called Martin Liedtke, and also, of course, New Earth on her channel, and Phil Trushin. And I'll be interested to see if people can find some videos that are, popular videos that are older than theirs, talking about Starforts being non-military and all over the place and related to an ancient empire. If you can find that a video like that before either of those three guys, I'll be interested to see it, because in English there are only those, as far as I'm concerned. And the first video, I think New Earth made it in 2015, and she was alone with that topic. And then Martin came and then Philip came, and then it has grown from there, I would say, and they are the reasons they have a large part of the blame for why we're talking about this. So big shout outs to Martin Litkin, New Earth, and Philip Drashinin, and also a shout out to Richard Lopez for also being a fantastic researcher and a good friend. And I know you also know Richard. I would love to have Richard on here. He's a big YouTube channel as well, talking about Mudflood and the history of Tartaria. Yeah, Andreas, did you ever go on Connecting the Dots?
I forget if we did that show.
I don't think you ever did. Richard was hoping for one, but then Google Hangouts died, and then yeah, we were left hanging. I think I was his last
episode together of something on our channel though. But yeah, we should try to do
Richard.
We did. I think the very first video I did was with Richard.
Really?
Yeah, Richard Lopez.
Oh.
Yeah, the very first video.
So if I type in Xirtus and Richard Lopez on YouTube, you'll find something?
Yeah, it looked like you when we met. I'm a young, sprightly YouTuber. You know, it's the very first video I did with him. The very first video I did on anything Tartary, really.
Really?
It was an interview.
Oh. Well, I remember when I first started hearing about you, I watched some of your videos. I was like, oh, who is this young buck?
I'd been super obsessed with Catherine the Great. I'd seen that series from Russia and thought it was really good. I was like, I can't forget if it was made in like 2014 or something, but I didn't see it probably till like 2016, you know. But I became pretty into it, and yeah, I think it's 2015. It was this Catherine the Great Russians show. I'm sure there's been a number of different shows, but this is the one I saw, and I saw it like 2015, 2016. I was just could not stop thinking about St. Petersburg and bastion forts, you know, and like because they shot this on location in St. Petersburg at all these castles. And I was like, what the heck is this place? And so that began my quest to find out more about this stuff, which led to Tartaria. You know, I'd already heard of Taras Bulba. I'd read the book and I'd seen the movie. You know, I'd thought a lot about Peter the Great. Thought a lot about Fyodor, you know, and Pyotr, you know, Peter's the son of Catherine, and how the Freemasons had taken the kids away and raised them basically away from the mother. So Catherine had very little interaction with her son. Eventually, her son did not trust her and thought that she had killed the father because of the coup that had happened. So it was interesting watching the royal family dismantled over a generation, but you know, the babies not being able to be held by the mothers made them insane. So, but if you start looking into the area, see these electric towers they had in the 1800s, and there's a very decidedly Soviet way of dealing with things, which is this oligarchy takes over these places, and these giant buildings become, you know, warehouse castle mansions. Often they weren't originally. They look like they originally were used for industrial purposes to, you know, for this free energy system.
Just a heads up, Andreas, we have 3 minutes until the promos go on, and we're ending this live show.
Very good.
So I'll have you talk for the last bit, because then I could just listen for when the music goes on, and then I'll ask you to mute, and then we'll jump off. So yeah, I'll just say. Yeah, Radio Tartary was once again a great success. Andreas, do you have something you would like to round out with?
Just gonna say it was great talking, and we'll continue looking into all of this together. And yeah, everybody, we have tons of videos with Victor, and tons more videos than most other channels on the subject. So go check out the YouTube Xirtus, Xirtus. There's a great documentary. History Revised. I think that's the best place to start with Tartary. And then also, yeah, tartarynova.com. A lot of information on the Discord. Come hang out.
Yeah, right. Come and hang out with us, because Andreas built this huge community, and we're a lot of active members in there, and we voice chat together, and we have a lot of fun, and there's ongoing research daily, and brilliant minds come there and share their brilliance, and there's a lot of learning by engaging in dialogue, I find. A lot of the time I used to engage in, not in dialogue and finding knowledge for myself, but after going into dialogue with a lot of brilliant minds, I feel like learning from dialogue is also another great way to really to find out the information you didn't know you wanted to find out about, because that is what happens when you do dialogue. When you research yourself, you find what you're looking for, or you don't find what you try to look for. And when you dialogue, you find something that you may not know or have known that you wanted to know. And that's the interesting part of it.
It's a decidedly polite and respectful place where, we try to strive for scientific and educational and philosophical advancement. I think it's a pretty nice forum. And in general, if you don't like that, there's also sick memes, super dank memes about Tartaria. So you could also be the first one on your block to see the newest Mudflood meme. So, and that's always fun too.
Yeah. So Mudflood memes, that is the new thing, right? Go into meme Tartary on the Discord to find those.
You're going to want to know what your kids are talking about. Check out the memes about Tartaria. It's real. Tartar sauce. Get the tartar
sauce, man. Can you please sing like recent Tartarians for us just a bit?
Recent Tartarians.
That's perfect. Because I can hear the music now. Let's sign off, man. It was cheers. Nice for thank you for having us again, and thank you for listening.